Alright, welcome to VFX 101. Today we will be discussing what exactly a VFX artist does, good pathways into the industry, what you can expect in the day-to-day as a VFX artist, and really what I hope that you get from this is a better understanding of the job responsibilities of a VFX artist and how to know when you're really ready to take on those responsibilities. So with that in mind, the first thing that we really have to go over is the difference between VFX and tech art. Because these two fields, especially in indie development, can be shared back and forth basically. Typically within an indie team, a technical artist will be wearing the hat of a VFX artist. Technical artists will be designing all the materials, the shaders, yada yada yada, making all the basic cool stuff. Your lava, your water, and all that. And in the process, they'll also be making the VFX for all these things too. When it comes to AAA, though, these fields are very different. Technical art really splits off more into scripting tools, shader development still, while VFX will mainly split off into texture development and particle work. Really, is the bulk of it. To some extent, a VFX artist can influence what is being done by tech art. In some studios, a tech art, a VFX artist can kind of take over more of the technical duties of the engine. Say for example something like wind can be handed to a VFX artist, but in that same respect, in other studios, a technical artist would handle these duties. Those wouldn't be under a VFX artist. That would be in the paradigm of a technical artist because it's deemed more technical than is really sensible to be under a VFX artist. So with that in mind, deciding between what you want to be, whether you want to be a VFX artist that works with sprites and that works with textures, that works with the most materials really, or if you want to be a technical artist that writes shaders and makes tools for artists and really takes on these more code heavy tasks. And that's a good decision that you want to be making now, at least in terms of making it into AAA. Like I said, with an indie, an indie representing even older, AAA. AAA didn't initially have VFX artists; they just had technical artists, and that's what you're seeing in indie today. Indie just has technical artists; they don't really hire VFX. VFX is becoming more common within indie games, but typically they'll have the technical artists do the visual effects for the game. As just part of the natural way of things. They may also contract a VFX artist for some very specific things, but they'll still probably be leaning into their tech art team for the bulk of their VFX work. So yeah, I mean that's a big thing to consider as you're trying to think about entering this industry. Is do I want to work with code heavily within a AAA scene? Do I want to work in an indie team and maybe do a little bit of both? Do I want to do both these things? Or do I want to work, only with particles and really only with textures and, not really lean into shaders as much and not really lean into, technical stuff as much. It's not to say that you can't be technical as a VFX artist, though. You definitely can. And in many ways, it's going to be appreciated. And the reality is too, visual effects is inherently more technical than other art forms, especially because you kind of just have to know all this arcane knowledge about how visual effects work within a game engine, and you really have to typically self-teach that. I'm trying to reduce the amount needed, but typically you have to learn a lot of that yourself. And it's such that a visual effects artist that is technical for AAA is kind of expected. You're going to be expected to have some level of technical knowledge, but at the same time, you're going to be expected to write like a super performant grass shading system. That's going to be under tech art, and not so much under VFX at all. Instead, with VFX, you'll be focused on sprites and particle effects for the bulk of it. So, with that in mind, then what exactly is like the day-to-day of a visual effects artist? So a visual effects artist, if you really want to break down, what a visual effects artist does, then basically, say you're starting from nothing on an effect. What you're going to start with is you're going to want to make like, let's say you're wanting to make some dust. So you're going to make like a quick little dust mount particle, or texture, I mean, because your team doesn't have a dust mount texture, so you're going to make a little dot like that. You're going to render it out, or export it from Photoshop or GIMP or whatever as like a 64 by 64 image. You'll apply that to the material within your game engine. Typically, you're going to be using materials. You're not going to make a whole shader or like an actual material for your particles. The particles will have, or the VFX team will have like a base shader, material that has been, like the material parent with all these children, so to say. So you'll just be like plugging in this texture into a network. You won't have to actually like drag nodes out and connect it to a bigger system and set a bunch of properties. It's less common at the very least. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but most of the time, especially in the AAA level, you can you'll have the option of like transparency and these type of things, but you won't be like actually connecting nodes or doing anything complicated like that. And even within the scale of like Unreal, you can typically create these master shaders and just let people create little materials off of those, children materials basically, off of those like master materials, and that can be a great time saver for your team, and it allows consistency across art and saves in terms of draw calls as well. So it's really the best route for any VFX team. But anyways, so that'll be like the start of your effect. Is you'll create a texture, and then you'll go in and you'll create a particle system. Say within like Unreal, you want to use like Cascade, so you'll create a particle system, and it's going to be just spawning all these sprites. So then what you'll end up doing is you'll say like, okay, well, I want this particle system to, instead of being like a spawning from a point, I want it to spawn from a volume. It's like a cube. And, I don't want these to move as much either. I don't want them to like move up. I just want them to kind of like sway. So then you'll just get like these like swaying particles. And this is an instant, right? Like this whole thing, like this might take, an hour. And if you want to do like multiple things, then it might take like 4 hours, right? Could easily happen to make something that's really high quality that you're comfortable shipping. And then this, can take like 2 hours, and or I guess I shouldn't put that here, but like the whole process of creating your particle system could be like 2 hours, or it could be more, definitely, especially if you start to like be like, okay, I want to bring in some rock gibs, or some like chunks of something, some models of something or whatever, and that's gonna add more time, so it's gonna be like 4 hours, but basically like that's the ideology. You're gonna make textures and add into materials, and then you're going to add those materials to sprites, and you're going to work on the sprite network and actually animate some particles, and make stuff look good, right? So that's really like the start of the day-to-day of an artist. And you'll notice here I'm not really saying like make shaders or do complicated geo work, or like the majority of the time that's not going to be what you're really doing. It's just kind of like because of cost, right? Like you're just trying to make stuff really cheap. And of course then you can also get into like what exact realms does a VFX artist work in? you know, if you think in the scope of like environment art, for example, you know, so you have like a mountainscape here. You might have like watched some videos on YouTube, and you're like, okay, well, that environment artist put birds up here, and you know, they were bird sprays, little simple bird particle systems, and that kind of stuff, and you know, they placed some volumetric fog in here, and you know, they placed a cloud card up here, you know, they added clouds or something. And the reality is, the majority of the time in AAA, at least, of course this can change for indie. Indie can be whatever indie is, and indie's pretty large. But within AAA, an environment artist is really just going to be placing these mountains. So, you know, they're going to master the height map and get the height map where it needs to be. You know, and then they'll place like, you know, trees and, you know, a house and this kind of stuff. These are the things that the environment art team will be focusing on. They won't really be focusing on this kind of stuff. Environment art will probably also still be focusing on, you know, bodies of water. So you have some like running water through here, whatever. They're going to be placing these. They're going to be creating the divots in the ground for that. You know, they're going to be creating the bridges that go over it, all of that. So that's not going to be under you. You know, they might place some fires. That's again not going to be under you. But what's going to happen is that you're going to have this scene with all this geo and all this stuff, but there's not going to be a lot going on, right? So when it comes to VFX, one of the realms of VFX is environment art, and it's environment VFX. It's an ambient effect, is what it's typically going to be called at a AAA studio. And that's going to be you coming in and saying, okay, we have some wood set up at a campfire here. Let's build a fire for this campfire. So, you know, now we set that campfire on fire. It looks good. Cool. You know, we want some birds in the sky. Okay, well, let's take some bird textures and you know, start animating those so that they look like there's birds in the sky. And you know, let's get some cloud cards up here. Let's get some, you know, smoke columns coming off this house. Let's get some splashes in this water. Let's on and on, right? So that's ambient effects. Something that might surprise you is that typically, like this volumetric fog that you might want in these mountains back here, that's actually not a VFX artist job. That's usually a lighter's job. Same for the general lighting of the scene. That's not going to be under environment or VFX. That's going to be under lighting. And you know, the general lighting coming off of like most things. Some teams or some studios will have lighting even handle the fire of this, or the light of this fire. That can even be moldable. So like, you know, the light will handle some lights and VFX will handle some lights, but that can even change too. You know, the VFX artist might be responsible for placing a light within this fire and getting the light to look good, but that could be under lighting too. Just depends on the studio you're at. So that's another thing to keep in mind when it even comes to, like, you know, these ambient effects is, you know, you may not even be expected to do certain aspects of the work that you're planning to do. You know, like another thing is like grading, right? Like a grade can be under VFX. It can also be under lighting. It can also be under skybox. You know, it can be under a different team. So there's no guarantee that you'll be working on these other aspects. The guarantee will be that you'll be working on the particles, though. Anything related to particles is going to be under your scope. So the next thing would be like a character, right? So, oh man. So we have like Boxman here. And Boxman needs some effects, you know. So that's when they would bring in a character effects artist. Typically, like most of the time, most studios will be doing both. You'll be doing environment effects and character effects. It's not always the case though. Sometimes it's just as a matter of like how much needs to get done. An artist will just be on characters, and an artist will just be on effects. Typically doesn't say much about the artist as much as it does about the schedule and keeping, you know,
if you've been working with designers for a long time, you'll probably have a good relationship with them. It just makes it easier. So, yeah, that's something to keep in mind. But when it comes to character effects, some of the things that you'll be working on within AAA for sure is, you'll be working on like again, ambient effects for like, their basic stuff. So like, say they have like a big gaping maw, right? Like you'll be working on drips. You'll be getting stuff dripping from their mouth. You'll be getting like, blood off their hands, to make it look like they're just like chewed down someone or something. You know, maybe they have like some fire coming off of their eyes or something, right? Like all that kind of stuff is going to be under you as an effects artist. What won't really be under you as an effects artist is if their like body mesh needs some cool, panning texture or something, right? Like that's not going to be under you. That's going to be on, tech art or character art or whoever. It's very rarely going to be under you as a VFX artist in AAA. Again, if you're wearing multiple hats as a technical artist with an indie, then yeah, this could totally be you as well as the stuff and everything else that is expected of you. But within AAA, the shader work of the character itself isn't really going to be under you as a VFX artist. Very rarely, at the very least. So, other things that you might work with them too actually is like projectiles, right? So if this thing wants to like projectile vomit a ball of, liquid, you're going to be building everything, really. You're going to be building the projectile itself, its exploded state, it's what it looks like when it impacts a character, what it looks like when it impacts various, ground materials. All these things are going to be under you. These are all going to be your responsibility to make it look as good as possible and as cheap as possible. And really, you're going to have to work with designers to, figure out what is all needed and go from there to build it all. So that's kind of like the basics, the basic day-to-day of what an artist, of what a VFX artist does within the games industry, right? They create ambient effects, they create character effects. They very rarely create much else. There's not that many side cases really necessary. Sometimes you work on like cinematics and you have some, very some artists that love cinematics because like they can have like 30 characters and have them all have their eyes on fire, and it looks really cool because all these guys' eyes are on fire, and you can't do that in real time because it's just too expensive. You can do it in the cinematic because the cinematic can only be like, you're fine to go going down to like 30 FPS in a cinematic and no one's going to really complain too much because they're not actually playing. You can actually, you can do stuff more directionality based if you know where the camera's looking and everything, so maybe you can lean into rotated sprites or something where you can't really do that in a typical effect or for gameplay. So you can also have cinematic artists as well too, I guess. And that's kind of the basics of what a visual effects artist is going to be doing in the industry. A visual effects artist isn't going to be controlling the lighting of the scene too heavily. A VFX artist isn't going to be placing geo too heavily. A VFX artist isn't going to be designing shaders too heavily, or doing like these kind of big projects. That's typically going to be on another department. So, with that being said, a VFX artist does get to handle all the ambient looks, all these other cool, look things that really help sell an environment being alive or a character being alive, or that make a cinematic really seem awesome. We frequently say like, we bring the hotness to the game, and I think that to be true. And the way we do that, right, is like I was saying, like you're expected to build textures, you're expected to build models, you're expected to build materials, but of course you're not going to be writing the shaders or doing very complex material building stuff. You're just plugging textures into a new material and going off of that. So with that, I hope that gives you a better idea of the day-to-days of a visual effects artist and how that career would look for you.